Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for a special treat as we invite you to our own variation of the famous Heart Talk session, where we will witness an absorbing Chaupal ki Charcha. As many of you would be aware, Chaupal is a Hindi word for an open-air courtyard or village square, while Charcha is another Hindi word that denotes a discussion. For this Charcha, we are honored by the presence of four especially distinguished discussants who will be engaged by Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, DGNMF, to elicit their views on the various nuances of resource-driven geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific, and whether these marine resources are driving regional geopolitics or whether it is geopolitics that is driving us to identify and explore newer marine resources. May I now request Admiral Chauhan to escort their Excellencies, Mr. Herve Delphin, High Commissioner of EU to India and Bhutan, Ms. Ina Krishnamurthi, Ambassador of Indonesia to India and Bhutan, Mr. Damien Syed, Deputy Chief of Mission and Officiating Ambassador of France to India, and Mr. Philip Green, High Commissioner of Australia to India. Mr. Green will join us shortly.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is not often that as the Director General of the National Maritime Foundation, I find myself quite so comprehensively intimidated. However, I am delighted and deeply honored to have with us the stellar representation from the countries most concerned at the very moment with the whole business of resources and resource geopolitics. Now, I don't know how many of you remember Tim Sebastian conducting Hard Talk on BBC, leaving TRP ratings for the BBC sky high and leaving the rest of the people somewhat uncomfortable. I thought that that may not be the best possible approach for us. And so I am also deeply honored and grateful that our distinguished panelists and guests have consented to take on a few questions and answer a few specific pointed queries from me in their inimitable style. Now, as you know, the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative is something that successive editions of the IPRD, that is the Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue, try hard to flesh out. And we are doing this sequentially, principally based upon our belief that and our conviction that while the maritime policy of India is encapsulated in the acronym SAGAR, so once again, SAGAR is not a vision, it's not some tasking. SAGAR is the maritime policy of India because it reflects what India's end state is. And since that stands for security and growth for all in the region, I cannot imagine that anybody in this region has a different end state in mind. And so with that thought, I thought that we would try and project SAGAR as the regional policy that we will now try and explore from country-specific perspectives. There's a great deal of expectation that we will first allow their excellencies to make some opening statements, and then we will be able to segue neatly and gently into the Q&A session. But we have a fairly short period of time in which to elicit responses. So I'm going to ask their indulgence not to actually move in this particular fashion, but for me to straight away launch into some questions that you may like to consider and then elaborate upon as you deem appropriate. I'm quite aware that I'm not Tim Sebastian and this is not Hard Talk. So this is, of course, the Chaupal ki Charcha, which has been explained in terms of its translation by the marvelous MC that we've got, Ms. Priyasha Dixit. And so let me begin without any further ado. And since ladies must always precede gentlemen, I think I will start. Is this a bad idea? Okay, so I'm going to start with Her Excellency, the the ambassador of Indonesia to India and Bhutan, and then see how we go. And in case you see these chaps coming along with a basket for me to be carried away in, you'll know that I've gone on for a bit too much. Joke. So ma'am, Excellency, so I wanted to ask you the first question, and that is that, as the demand for critical minerals is increasing as one of the main resources of this region's interest, a number of countries are resorting to protectionist measures. Indonesia, for example, was reported a few months ago to have banned the export of nickel. And amongst other things, these sorts of decisions inject considerable urgency to all of us and other countries to prematurely perhaps rush into areas such as seabed mining without having done sufficient environmental impact assessments and be guided by prudence rather than the urgency that is driven by the fact that the mineral resource in question is simply unavailable on the land anymore from where it began. And so, indeed, deep sea mining or deep sea bed mining is fast emerging as a critical issue in the Indo-Pacific. You've already heard a few things about it in the last session. And Excellency, what I wanted to ask you was, how is Indonesia approaching the challenge of balancing its resource extraction with the protection of marine ecosystems, both of which I know that your country is deeply interested in? Thank you. Yep.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. If you keep the mic really close to you, then you'll be able to hear.
First and foremost, thank you for inviting me and including Indonesia in the conversation. It's a really tough list of questions that you pose to us all ambassadors who are for sure not an expert on this matter, but I will try my best to reflect what Indonesia's position is. Maybe some of you have traveled to Indonesia. You may know that Indonesia is the biggest archipelagic nations with 17,000 islands. And for us, managing the seas, the oceans are one of the biggest challenges we have in terms of governance. And Indonesia's marine biodiversity, of course, play a very important role in our economy, especially the domestic and global supply of fish and seafood. And in fact, maybe you may know this, Indonesia is home to some rarest, most diverse marine life on the planet, and especially in the eastern region of the Pacific Coral Triangle, we call it. And so we do emphasize the need to improve the economic benefits of conservation. And on this in 22, just 2 years ago, or maybe around a year ago, Indonesia has pledged to expand its marine protected area coverage to around 325,000 square kilometers by the end of this decade, which is around only 10% of its total territorial waters, while from 2030 to 2045, we plan to triple that coverage to 30%. So the plan is actually part of our contribution to what we call the Global 30 by 30 conservation. The goal of that we decide and agreed upon, which aims to protect 30% of the world seas and lands by 2030. So in this regard, when you talk about banning nickel export, the raw materials, we are developing, and we're still developing strategies to strengthen the planning and monitoring of the marine protected areas. And for sure, we want to have a sustainable management in these zones, particularly the eastern part of Indonesia. And in addition of it, the government is kind of prioritizing the maintenance and restoration of healthy ocean ecosystems. You may heard some years back, I think in around 2016 or 17, where our coral reef was damaged by a cruise ship, one of the biggest in the world coral reef area in Malucas. So we don't want that to happen again. And for sure, we focus on resources, including mangroves, marshes, sea grasses, coral reefs, whatever we have, the richness of our seas and ocean. And this is one of the, another challenge is how to have a cost-effective way to protect the local communities from a disaster, and also because climate change, the sea level also rise. So I think the most important thing for Indonesia, I mentioned governance, and the second issues that I just mentioned is all about management. And my third part is that our effort in international collaboration so far, we have collaborated with UAE on Mangrove Alliance for Climate. This is for mangrove promotion based solution to climate change. And India joined this effort in 2022.
Excellency, thank you so much for that succinct response, and not just succinct, but I'm glad that you managed to widen that particular response, because as everybody here, or many people in this audience are aware, Indonesia has taken the lead. This is a joint lead in the IPOI pillar or spoke on marine resources and resource sharing. So with that, let me now turn to His Excellency Mr. Herve Delphin, who has been a tour de force in the number of months that he's already spent here in New Delhi, and has most of India wrapped around his little finger. So, so I'm going, yes, you agree? You don't agree? So I'm going to ask you, sir, to answer a question that has been intriguing us for some time. Now, the European Union continues to describe China as simultaneously being a partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival. However, of late, the European Union seems to have acknowledged that the balance of challenges and opportunities presented by China has shifted to a point closer to the challenges, where now the economic relationship is critically unbalanced, and that China's economic model has brought about systemic distortions with negative spillovers to its trading partners. So now my question is this, that in the specific context of the marine resources within the Indo-Pacific and the geopolitics that are driven by these resources, what exactly does this expression systemic rival mean to you in person, sir, and to the European Union that you so ably represent?
Thank you very much, Vice Admiral Chauhan. I must say, I arrived indeed almost a year ago to Delhi, and I think the very evening I landed, I had a wonderful dinner with you and the National Maritime Foundation. So it was my introduction to my tenure was great to start on such a high note with NMF. And it was also a sign that how much maritime security matters to the EU as part of this Indo-Pacific strategy. To get straight to your question, which is a very, very pointed one, and probably will not allow me to do justice to what the EU is aiming in the region. But if you're zooming in on one particular actor of the region, but let's put it that way, in the larger frame of things, the EU engagement in the Indo-Pacific is it's a strategy for cooperation. It's an inclusive strategy, but a strategy that aims at keeping prosperity and maintaining stability. And maintaining stability comes in different ways and forms. And the first of it is absolute respect for UNCLOS. And I think on this we've been on record, is the respect of territorial waters. We put out a statement in respect to the specific country you mentioned not long ago for activities in Philippines. So I think the general pattern that you are describing, the systemic rivalry, I was one of those that fathered that strategy of the EU toward China. What we meant by systemic rival is that the system of values and principles that govern the vision of the world and the projection is something that is not in line with what we, Europe, expect and want to do for ourselves. There is no judgment value here. It's just a simple fact and observation. And the element of partnership and competition and rivalry between the EU and China has evolved over time. And it's true that we have seen more of rivalry emerging, not necessarily as a matter of EU-owned deeds and action, more as a result of a strategic competition which is played out between two big players. When it comes to the EU in particular, whenever we see indeed China taking actions that we feel are hurting our interest or general international principles, we put it on record, and it's part of the conversation that we are having with them. So coming to natural resources, so that in the program you got IUU. China, by statistic, is one of the worst offenders. I'm not putting any judgment, it's just a factual reality. So for us, IUU is not just a question of, I would say fish and chips. Sorry, I'm French, so I have to make a reference to food. But because as a French, that it would be a bit more sophisticated than fish and chips. It has to be something a bit more complete conversation that we have. I mean, we've been engaging with partners in the region about how they can develop a sustainable management of their resources, whether fisheries, whether natural resources from the seabed and the rest. So I think this is this sense of establishing governance. That's the reason why also EU has joined the IPOI, and we are part of several sub-regional organizations, part of the sub-regional fisheries management areas, where basically it's all about helping countries in the region to manage their resources in a sustainable manner. And there are different elements, of course, of surveillance at sea. By the way, one of the two sea operations of the EU, the CSDP operation, Security and Defense, Atalanta, was at the origin an issue of helping a country in East Africa to have a greater control of its territorial waters, and also which were plundered in different ways on top of piracy. So I think this is inherent part of the way we engage. Now, of course, the context has changed for Atalanta and the other operation, Aspides, and I think the commander of Aspides will be with you tomorrow. But I think the short and the long here is that when it comes to China or any other partner that for us does not play the rules of the game, I would say, the conventions that have been established, like there is now an international authority on seabed. The EU, France, and other member states have signed it. We think as long as there is not enough scientific evidence, we should refrain from going to the commercial activities in the seabed, because we do not know. We will be like Dr. Frankenstein trying to do something, and we thinking that it can be of good, but at the end of the day might be of turning into a wrong. When you look at critical raw materials, I think here it's pretty clear where we stand in terms of diversification and security. Together with India, actually, we are part of the Mineral Security Partnership a year ago, and we even went a step further with the Mineral Security Financial Network. So I think from this perspective, the EU and India have a strong joint interest as part of the diversification, both in the direction of sourcing and processing. So I think that's the bigger picture. And whether China wants to play cooperation or antagonization, in a way, that's their call. We are not pushing them in any direction. But according to the way they act, we will have to adapt our line of conduct, keeping cooperation with all partners in the regions, whether Australia, Indonesia, and others.
Well, I think that's absolutely brilliant because it conforms almost exactly with the way that India itself sees the EU and its efforts. It's just that this particular term I thought needed some clarification, and you've done that admirably. Thank you so much. And let me turn now to Mr. Damien Syed, who is the Deputy Chief of Mission and today's officiating ambassador of France. And then just segue from what Ambassador Delphin said about the rules-based order and things of that nature. And like so many Indo-Pacific nation states, such as the ones he's already mentioned, Australia, Indonesia, India, the European Union, which is not a nation state, but a collective, France too has been a persistent and a staunch advocate of an internationally accepted rules-based order in which the rules are consensually derived rather than being derived by force in a given capital or in a given country. On the other hand, at this moment at least, we perceive China to be somewhat unimpressed by the solidarity of everybody else and appears to be determined to supplant the current rules-based order with a rules-based order, which it professes is for the good of all mankind, but where the rules are likely to be made only in Beijing. Now, what I wanted to ask you was, how would you propose that we face the challenges posed by this particular geopolitical view and the aggressiveness that accompanies that view in maritime resource grabbing? And how does France look to its partners to establish or underscore this solidarity that I've spoken about, where the solidarity seeks to emphasize the requirement and the need for a rules-based order and highlights the dangers of abandoning that rules-based order for some other one which we really don't know anything about? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Admiral, for inviting me today. It's a great pleasure and honor to take part in this Chaupal ki Charcha. बहुत धन्यवाद. Right. कोई बात नहीं. So actually, your question will lead me to first completely subscribe to what Ambassador Delphin just said. And I don't say that because he's French, but also because France is part of the EU, and our policy towards China is also part of this triptych Ambassador Delphin just described. So it's a matter of fact. Sadly, over the last few years, it has been more indeed difficult to feed the positive agenda with China. And on the contrary, the systemic rivalry has increased. It is not our will, it is not deliberate from us, but it's obvious in several areas. This assertiveness, this assertion of China has been more and more tangible, palpable. It's clear. So France, as a resident nation of the Indo-Pacific, sees it important to continue engaging China to maintain a balance between those three aspects, without being naive, but to be constructive, productive. We have to commit so that it can be useful to engage with China, again being realistic, pragmatic, and demanding with Beijing. So in the face of this aggressiveness in the region, France priority is to keep the Indo-Pacific open, free, stable, rule-based region, or the region. It has to be inclusive, and for that, we want to play a role by giving practical life to the freedom of navigation. That's why we have carried out over the last years ships, deployments of ships on the passages in the South China Sea without provocation, but with resolve. We have organized, held with several partners, military joint exercises to demonstrate stronger interoperability of our forces. And it is noted by the Chinese authority. It is, of course, noticeable in their eyes. We will continue with our Indian partners and other stakeholders in the region. At the same time, we also have to engage with third states, with other countries in the region to propose concrete initiatives, alternative in terms of infrastructure, in terms of security. We have started to do so with India, with other partners. It's part of our Indo-Pacific strategy. We have just opened in Sri Lanka a maritime center for studies and security in Sri Lanka. It's not in the Indo-Pacific, but with India, we have opened a solar academy in Senegal, in Western Africa. We are, of course, committed in other aspects. We are part of the Information Fusion Center for the Indian Ocean Rim in Gurgaon. We have a close cooperation also between our two space agencies, CNES and ISRO, for monitoring the maritime domain and the marine resources. It's through satellites, and it's still a work in progress, but it's advancing. We have regular maritime cooperation dialogue with India at the deputy NSA level. Again, so to answer to the second point of your questions in terms of solidarity, in that regard, we are very happy to be part of the IPOI launched by India. France joined IPOI in 2021, shortly after Prime Minister Modi announced this initiative. We consider it useful. We do appreciate this web of intertwined, interconnected pillars. It's a useful platform to promote regional partnerships between countries. We did that with, we are doing that with Indonesia. I'm happy to be next to the ambassador of Indonesia. We are co-leading the marine resources pillar. So we are implementing concrete efforts to nurture, to flesh out this pillar. This week, we are organizing in Bali, just now, since on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of October, a workshop within the IORA to prepare guidelines, IORA guidelines on combating illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. It will be a very concrete outcome of our efforts. So we know the practice of some countries in the Indian Ocean. We follow that closely. Fighting illegal fishing is crucial and a priority. It was said because of its damaging impact on the local communities, local economy, coastal welfare, and also, of course, the biodiversity resources, the marine resources. So we have to work collectively, and that's the strong will of France as an Indo-Pacific region, again, We know that the center of gravity of today's world is here in terms of population, GDP, in terms of common challenges. What happens here is critical for the future international order. It has to remain rules-based international order, and also how we address global challenges, climate change, biodiversity. So we are very active in this region, and we will continue to do so with our Indian friends.
Thank you so much. That's all music to our ears, not just Indian ears, but I'm sure ears of everybody in the Indo-Pacific, that we are all embarked upon a process of collaboration and cooperation both, which my chairman has quite correctly pointed out are two different things. I'm pleased that, like everybody else, that we are in fact proceeding down one particular pathway. So guys, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies in the audience, before you ask your questions, we're not over yet. So I just want to take a deep breath and ask my very senior diplomatic guests to similarly take one deep breath while you shower us with applause for the first round. Yeah, there you go. That makes us feel so much better already. Yes, all the nervousness is now gone. And so thank you. Thank you very much. And let me now turn back for a second quick round and request for somewhat short answers to long questions. Would that be all right? Yeah, so I wanted to talk to you, Madam Ambassador, about the Natuna Sea in specific terms. So this is leading off from where Mr. Syed left us in terms of strategic signaling, rather than any belligerent actions is not what I'm talking about. But in terms of signaling, it seems important to us to be able to understand the value and the limitations of signaling, particularly when we are talking about the manner in which we might flesh out the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. And here, this is not specifically to you, ma'am, but it is to everybody to just let you know once again that the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative is an initiative which is quite different from anything that the world has experienced thus far. What we're saying is not that this is some grand Indian plan which you may join or not join or accept or reject. This says to the world's diplomatic, practicing, and analytical communities, lift your game. And so when we say lift your game, it means that we're trying to say that, look, there are these 7 lines of thrust that we must be able to pay attention to. And in these lines of thrust, we look at one another and say, hi, so do you think anybody's got an idea? Does anybody, would you like to follow us? No? Would you like us to follow you? No? Would you like us to go hand in hand? No? You don't want us there at all? Anything will do. So long as we sort out the problem. Obviously, the last one is not an option of choice for us. But so long as we address the issues. Now, why are we keen to address these issues? Because there are contestations going on in terms of the entire way that, as all 3 of our interlocutors have already pointed out, in the value systems that are being propagated or generated by different countries. And here, let me now return to the Natuna Sea. So in the Natuna Sea, you've got this huge store of natural gas, and there are some frictional points there between yourselves and the proponents of the 9-dash line. And now there's a 10th dash line running east of Taiwan, which everybody is even more concerned about. And these dashed lines, despite having no basis in international law, have caused quite a number of incidents and standoffs between legal enforcement agencies, and have certainly sparked off a large amount of diplomatic activity, mostly in the form of rows. So the offshore block, for example, the Tuna offshore block of the northern Natuna Sea sits squarely within this 9-dash line. And so on the ground, China has employed a certain show of force, sending civilian and Coast Guard ships to the exploration areas to intimidate Indonesia. And so I would like to perhaps inform us or advise us on how we might take a leaf out of the Indonesian book in dealing with these sorts of challenges should they arise in the future. Not that we hope that they will, but you never know how dashed lines tend to increase in both scope and range, and we might start seeing dashed lines in unexpected places. So we're really keen to know how Indonesia is handling this sort of situation and what degree of balance is being achieved between diplomacy and strong strategic signaling. And I must say that I'm deeply impressed by the way that Indonesia is doing it. So, ma'am.
Such a long question. And I don't know how many questions there are in the question. But I want to start with one statement, and it is very important statement. We are not a claimant state of the South China Sea. That needs to highlight it, underline, and emphasize. Although some sort of a vague, maybe recognition or imagination, there is a claim that there is an overlapping dot in our EEZ. But Indonesia consistently said there is no overlapping claims based on UNCLOS. So our discussion is always based on UNCLOS. And in 2020, we also have sent a diplomatic note to the UN to say that Indonesia is not bound by any claims made in contravention to the international law. It is very clear message. And as such, if there is a problem of border, of course, we will have a bilateral meetings and negotiation. But since we do not have a border problem in this regard, we don't see the need of going to a negotiation mode. Indonesia even renamed the EEZ as, to read this, North Natuna Sea, because we need to reinforce the territorial claims. And I think for us, it is very important, the welcome, Philip. We're so happy that the expert of maritime is here. We need to, for sure, to be very definitive in our territorial integrity, because we need to fight the illegal fishing in our EEZ, including in the Natuna. So confronting any foreign vessels, it's our responsibility, and with that, our Navy is very capable of. Simultaneously, of course, the patrolling and also strengthening military presence is also, we have done it because we believe in our Navy forces. So again, if I may say, this is again I'm trying to read your question. So I would like to close with this. There is an important way of dealing with South China Sea in the view of Indonesia, which is the conclusion of the negotiation of the code of conduct and to manage the issue. Because if we do not manage the issue and we do not have solid governance, then the escalation will have a larger impact in the region. And with that, I want to say that ASEAN dialogue mechanism is the best there is to reach the agreement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Excellency. Now that we're joined by His Excellency Mr. Philip Green, Australian High Commissioner. First of all, may I request the audience to please give him a round of applause in terms of welcome. And let me, before he puts his hand down from that wonderful namaste position, let me straight away go to you, Excellency, and ask you, Australia is deeply involved and invested in 3 trilaterals with India, namely the Australia-India-Indonesia trilateral, the Australia-India-France trilateral, and the Australia-India-Japan trilateral, quite apart from the Quad. So my question is that these are minilaterals and trilaterals and this sort of thing. It's a slightly it's an alternative, perhaps in some areas, in some contexts, to the large multilateral constructs that do exist. So how might these minilaterals be leveraged, and how does Canberra see this, or how do you see it anyway? How might they be leveraged to counter aggressive expansionism by one or another country while ensuring fair access to critical resources? And this stems really, Excellency, from an earlier comment in the previous session, which asked the question of whether resources are driving geopolitics, or are geopolitics currently driving the search and identification for new resources? So how might these trilaterals best be leveraged? Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Vice Admiral, to you and to my co-panelists and to the audience. Apologies for my lateness today. Something got profoundly wrong, but I'm delighted to be here, and thanks for your thoughtful question. Look, we are fortunate to live in the most economically dynamic region of the world. And the history of the last generation is all about the vibrancy of the Indo-Pacific. And it's Australia's enormous good fortune that we live in the company of countries like India, Indonesia, and many others that are growing fast and that have strong complementary economies to ours. Economies that are strong on manpower and personnel, but not so strong on resources, and that's a need that we can fill. But that great economic opportunity is in jeopardy because our region is much more highly contested than it ever was. And Australia feels the contestation between the superpowers as well as the many smaller frictions that there are in our region. And fundamentally, Australia's foreign and strategic policy is all about our own agency, seeking for Australia to be a player to help shape the sort of region that we want to have. Not sitting back quietly and hoping that things get sorted out, but engaging with those to try to build bridges and make things work. So, a key part of that, perhaps the most fundamental, the first thing we normally talk about is our bilateral relationship with the United States. Strong cornerstone of our security. In a way that we have never done before, we are seeking to leverage that for peace and security in the Indo-Pacific. We are deliberately encouraging the United States to be more engaged here and for it to do all it can to maintain the peace and ensure that the economic buoyancy of the region can go on. We take enormously seriously the role of sub-regional organizations. And ASEAN is the key one, and Australia is putting a huge amount of diplomatic effort into ASEAN. We are fortunate that we have at the heart of our region 10 countries which are dedicated to peace and security, and that can form a lubricating force in a period of great power contestation. To answer your question, the third big way in which we seek to improve the prospects for our region is through minilateral dialogues. These are ways in which we can seek to, with those with whom we have shared perspectives, to clarify what we think the problem sets are and to identify ways in which they might be solved. And, you know, it's natural, in particular, since we are all here, Australia, France, India, Australia, Indonesia, India, we share a lot of interests in common. And in particular, not entirely, but in particular, in relation to the Northeast Indian Ocean, that's where we think about Australia, India, and Indonesia. And in relation to the broader Indian Ocean, it's where we think about Australia, India, France. To be perfectly frank, you know, I don't think a lot of those conversations are about economic issues. Most of those conversations are about political strategic issues, because that's really where the problem set lies. And we hope that by building up levels of shared understanding and what we are each prepared to do individually and collectively through our agency to ensure that the worst projections for our region don't come to pass, that's what those trilaterals are designed to do.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that clarification and for the clarity inherent in your response. Thank you. Let me turn back to you, Excellency, Mr. Delphin, and ask you that likewise, like the case with Australia, and in the case of the European Union, one of the strengths of the European Union is indeed in its partnerships, not just within the European Union's own member states, but with other countries and with the countries of the Indo-Pacific. So how do you think that the European Union could best leverage these partnerships, this huge store of goodwill that has been built up between, say, the European Union and India, where the European Union is certainly now being seen as much more than a single-dimensional partner and is being seen in all its multi-dimensional richness. How might you think that we can, that the European Union could leverage these partnerships to uphold this internationally accepted and consensually derived rules-based order? How should the European Union and its partners prevent the weaponization of marine resources, whether they are to do with fish or they are to do with critical minerals or rare earth elements? Everything, unfortunately, in our region has a marked tendency towards being weaponized. And therefore, what is your advice to us all?
Thank you, Vice Admiral. I think your question, in a way, holds its answer about what the EU has been striving to do in this part of the world. Clearly, through the wide array of agreements that we develop, either bilaterally, we are negotiating an FTA with Australia, with Indonesia, with India, the quad of FTAs. We hope that we're going to come to conclusions. But the point is that through any FTA that the EU has signed with any partner has leveraged tremendous growth, economic benefits. It's not a lose-lose game. It's a win-win game. So that's how you maximize the potential of cooperation between the EU and key partners like Australia, Indonesia, India, and the region is the first, I would say, order of action. Second, we are, in our DNA, a regional organization, and that we recognize in ASEAN, typically a sister organization. Even though we have our different history, different organizational, institutional role, we signed some years ago, not recently, a strategic partnership with ASEAN because we believe in ASEAN. I mean, all this serves one single purpose, is to give more ballast for strategic equilibrium in this region. If we don't do it, you leave it to the fortune of might is right, of, as you say, weaponization of everything. And it's not particular to this region. I mean, we see it on other fronts. In Europe, we see it. So I think our role for the EU, when we often say, well, the EU, you know, we have so much to do on your own continent, people sometimes fail to realize from the EU perspective, and I call it as an aggregate of member states, we are either the first trading partner, the second or the third trading partner. We've got most of the FDI in this region comes also from Europe. We are a main provider of ODA. So we have a lot in this region. 40% of our imports come from this region. 30% of our exports go to this region. So we're not just at the periphery of it. We are right into it. So do we leave it to the fortunes indeed of confrontation? We really believe that first, continuing the generation of growth, which is beneficial for the region, for the world, is key. And that's what we have been engaged. But have these comprehensive agreements to be able to address also global commons. You talk about biodiversity, and we just had the signing of the High Seas Treaty on biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions, which is an absolute key, a key plank. So I think all these webs of things help to knit together and prevent the temptation to take unilateral action that can lead to disaster, strategic disaster. And I think while there is more investment from different players to try to prevent that, there is also increased tension. So we are at this situation where basically you have a buildup of forces in two directions, and it's coming to a climax. And I think we all have actors in the region that seek an element of balance, of strategic balancing, even more interest to invest nowadays. And I think that's the reason why from the EU, we recognize in working with India, Indonesia, ASEAN, Australia, and other actors, it's not a luxury, it's a must, it's an absolute necessity.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, I entirely agree with you. Thank you so very much. Mr. Syed, France is the only country with a seabed warfare strategy, and that too one which is in the public domain, and it is devoured, I dare say, by all the strategic community. First of all, I wanted to just re-emphasize one simple point. Strategic is an adjective, and you cannot have a strategic anything unless you have a strategy. So I'm very pleased that France not only has a strategic outlook, but has a strategy to match it. However, the seabed has enormous relevance even outside the paradigm of conflict. And so would France, in your opinion, consider releasing a similar strategy on the sustainable development and exploitation of seabed resources? And pending the appearance of such a publication in the public domain, could you share your personal perception of the position that France ought to take vis-a-vis what His Excellency Mr. Delphin cautioned us against, which is don't rush in where angels fear to tread into areas of deep sea mining before we have had an adequate amount of understanding of what the consequences of those particular actions might be. But would France consider, do you think, creating a new strategy, but not one of war, but a seabed exploitation, sustainable exploitation strategy? Because we certainly look to France for considerable leadership in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Admiral. On this issue of exploitation of the deep seabed, France has taken a clear and strong stance. President Macron expressed, it was 2 years ago, during the United Nations Climate Change Conference, the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. France supports the banning of deep seabed mining. We consider that in the view of the effects of biodiversity erosion and the more and more threatening climate change effects, it would not be reasonable, not wise to launch hastily new projects for deep seabed mining and exploitation. At the same time, exploration must continue, and it must also grow. Exploration to deepen our knowledge of the seabed within the framework of international cooperation with researchers from all around the world. We want that. That's the French position. Ambassador Delphin mentions the BBNG treaty. We do welcome the signing of this treaty last week by Minister Jay Shankar on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. It's an important step. So France works toward the entry into force of this treaty. We need at least 60 countries having ratified this. We have around 8, I think, at this stage. So we have to continue the process. It will be an important milestone for the protection of marine resources. It will be, in addition to the UNCLOS, it will reinforce this rules-based international order we are advocating. It is urgent, considering what we can see in terms of impact on the biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Excellency, High Commissioner Green, would you be able to help me out with one last point? And that is that it just continues with this particular issue of deep sea mining and exploration of the seabed. These are all areas in which India is, and like everybody else here, is quite deeply interested in, concerned about, optimistic about, pessimistic about, all at the same time. And so with this race for deep sea mining accelerating and deep sea exploration leading more and more countries to consider mining, especially for rare earth elements that are considered to be essential for clean energy technologies, what does Australia actually see as the main legal and environmental challenges of deep sea exploration and mining in the Indo-Pacific? How do you see this, sir?
I think the fundamental challenges, aren't they, are commercial viability and ecological sustainability. And I think the previous answers have sort of well rounded out the fact that in those two areas there are big unresolved questions. I have to say, for my country, our huge focus is on what we are doing in our own land and in our exclusive economic zone. You know, we are the largest, we have the largest global reserves of lithium, of iron ore, of uranium, of zircon, a range of minerals in the world. And our big effort is to be able to have approved enough big projects to bring on all of the requirements that are needed for the new economy. And here, the lithium, the copper, the nickel, the heavy metals, all of this are the really tough things. And frankly, that's not easy. You know, we've had a 3-generation history of being one of the biggest mining countries in the world. But, you know, what have you got to do? You have to find investors who are prepared to put huge amounts of money up front. And here, you know, Japan, Korea, the United States, the United Kingdom, France have been very important for us in establishing resource projects. And then those resource projects have to deliver a return in terms of resource availability over 20, 30, 40 years that will return that capital. And just to make that clear, the classic Australian mining or resource project would have 60% of the resource sort of pre-sold and 40% available for spot market or other deals. So, you know, that's pretty hard. And you've got to do that at the time as in a country like mine, there's a huge focus on environmental sustainability and the ecology of our planet. And that brings into question issues of green mining. how you can get stuff out of the ground without a huge cost to climate action. You know, our Minerals Council has committed to 2050 net zero. It's pretty difficult in the outback of Australia to find projects that you could do that would have a zero impact on the climate. We are pursuing a plan for what we call a nature conservation plan. And in that, what we're trying to do is two things. First of all, to stiffen the penalties for those who operate against the rules, but also to speed the mechanisms for approval of projects. Because one thing that can really lose momentum is if it's difficult to get projects settled quickly. So look, seabed mining, I'm sure there's a future for that somewhere, but you know, the very clear focus of our government is trying to be able to produce the needs of the new economy for the next generation, and that is a big task.
Indeed it is, and thank you so much. So I have another 408 questions on my list, but since we are out of time, I'm going to, first of all, express my own gratitude to each one of our very distinguished interlocutors this afternoon. Thank you, Excellencies. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to ask whether there are points and issues from the audience. So I can see one hand stridently going up. And so, yes, sir, please go ahead. That Rishi.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir, DG. Questions to each of the panelists in a sense.
Rishi, try not hog the entire thing. I've already done that.
Okay, sir. Well, a question to Monsieur Syed and to Ambassador Green. France actually has in your policy documents, you use the word quadrilateral security agreement. So the only quad, so the quad of India, US, Australia, and Japan really should be called the Northern Quad. And your quad of Australia, New Zealand, France, and US should be called the Southern Quad. But at the same time, your two countries have had a falling out over the Naval deal, and then France going in, Australia going in for the AUKUS deal. So how do you see the future of the Southern Quad, and what should be the interaction of the two quads? The other question I'll ask Monsieur Delphin, you talk about the European Union. I'll also pose it to Monsieur Syed in a sense, what's the role of NATO? Because all your countries are NATO countries, and even if the UK has left the EU, it's very much part of NATO. And you keep talking of the US, which has now signed UNCLOS. Thank you. Sorry I've taken time, Admiral, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Maybe we'll take a question, or would you like to just address the thing?
It's very easy for me. Australia and France have a powerfully strong security partnership. And whether it's in the way in which we act together to put Ukraine in a position to negotiate a peace on its own terms, or whether it's to ensure security in the Indo-Pacific, Australia and France are always very closely bound together. Yes, Australia has gone a different way in relation to the submarine deal. There's plenty of other deals that Australia has that France can benefit from our very large defence procurement. We're moving to 2.4% of GDP on defence, so there'll be opportunities for everybody there, including India, by the way. On your other question, look, I don't have a particular view about whether the two quads have a sort of an overlapping reality that is of consequence. I think what is interesting here, isn't it, that everyone is trying to find new geometries that might help us navigate this more complex world. And so it's not surprising that we get confusing proliferation of quads, which in itself is not a big deal, I think. But what it tells you is that this is a mechanism by which many of us see a way to try to chart some complex waters.
Thank you so much, High Commissioner.
Very briefly, on the NATO question, it's very clear. France doesn't support the extension of NATO to the Indo-Pacific. we clearly distinct the questions. NATO is the North Atlantic Organization Treaty, a treaty of North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's not focused on the Indo-Pacific. We are, as I said, a resident nation of the Indo-Pacific because of our geography, because of our overseas territories. We have 7 of 13 French overseas territories in the Indian Ocean or in the Southern Pacific. That's why we are so committed, involved, and active in the region. It's not to bring NATO in the region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I tend to agree with both our distinguished interlocutors. First of all, it's a bit awkward to have too many geometries. I think it's a bad idea to have quads and triangles and stuff like that. We must be more flexible in our approach. But then that's not within my pay grade. So yes. One question from the student body. Yes, sir. We have an awful lot of young people here, and they're just sort of dying to hear your comments.
Hello, sir.
Now, sir, just 1 minute. If we can give a chance to youth first. Youth before beauty.
Hello, sir. Recently, China has launched a missile which landed in Nuku-Hiva near French Polynesia.
Your question to somebody in particular?
Yes, sir.
Oh, to the
To Mr.
mission.
Syed.
Okay. Can you just repeat your name, please? I'm so sorry I didn't get it.
I'm Anurag Sharma. I'm a researcher.
Okay.
So recently, China tested a missile which landed in Nuku-Hiva near French Polynesia. How does it concern in terms of cooperation with China? And what is the strategic implications for countries like Indonesia and Australia as they fall in line of fire from the perspective of strategic arc?
Would you like to take that? Or would we take another question first? Let's take another question as well, and then we will see how best that can be answered. No, we had a question there from Sir. Yes. I'm so sorry. We just have to go by queue. My apologies, Maddie.
I'm Commodore Jasveer, and my small question, not question, but clarification, is from the officiating ambassador of France. He mentioned that there is a data center for regional, exchange of data between the IPRD countries, and it's located in Gurgaon. Well, I was not aware of it. And is it true that it is in Gurgaon and there is a data center like that?
I think I can answer that. I think what would you like to take it on?
Under your control, I confirm the existence of this center. It has been operational already, and we have a seconded French officer, a liaison officer. It has been for now 3 years. So he is present physically, and we have visited this center. I confirm it exists. No, really.
So the IFC IOR is, I think, what was being referred to, sir. Perhaps you got the data bit a little confusing, but the Information Fusion Center Indian Ocean region is a well-established center, and now we have already 13, and I think we're moving up to something around 40 international liaison officers who will bring their respective expertise to be able to move this particular Information Fusion Center in Gurgaon as the region, this particular segment of the region's principal data exchange on maritime domain awareness mechanisms and not on intelligence sharing mechanisms. Now we had one, first of all, Mr. Mahadev and Shankar.
Mahadev and Shankar from Down Under. My question is specific both to High Commissioner Philip Green as well as to High Commissioner Krishnamurthi. Mining, both of you touched on that. 5 years with what happened in the mining sector in Indonesia, it has pretty much almost shutting down a few nickel mines in Australia. BHP is shut down. So on the one hand, Australia is trying to push and pursue responsible, environmental friendly mining and production of critical minerals. On the other hand, Indonesia is pushing out a big glut of supplies coming out. So my question is relating to what I'm going to be presenting tomorrow, I just wanted to hear from both of you. Do you all see a conflict in what's happening between both the countries, especially since we are all working in the Indo-Pacific domain? And then you have an Inflation Reduction Act coming from the US, which is pushing hard at both Australia and Indonesia. Thank you.
So perhaps, ma'am, we could ask you to take a stab at that first.
I think you're sitting beside my expert then. So maybe you should ask her instead of me. Ibu Fifi is more knowledgeable than me. But for sure, you need to understand the much difference between us, Australia and Indonesia. Australia is developed country, for sure. And Indonesia is developing country, and we've been criticized by many when we ban export of raw materials, but maybe because people do not understand that for tens of years we survive the economy by exporting the raw materials, and we do not get anything. So the President Joko Widodo policy is to be a better country, be a better government. And to answer your question specifically, I don't know, but for sure that we are trying our best to reduce what we called, how should I say in English? If there is a term of brainwash, we want to have an added value economy rather than a natural resource wash in a way. So if people criticize us in terms of the export, it's not because we want to, but in this, you know, one biggest lesson that we have in pandemic is that we need to depend on ourselves more than we depend on others. That is why we are more inward rather than outward. That's my answer.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir.
Just quickly, I would say Australia warmly welcomes Indonesia's growth and development as a nation, including it becoming an even stronger competitor to Australia in the minerals domain. Good on you, Ina. More seriously, the question about the fact that some mines have closed in recent times in Australia, it underlines what I said before. Mining's complex business. Mining's a really complex business. And getting the economics right can be genuinely difficult. Of course, the great sweep of history in Australia has been that this has been enormously valuable to us. But individual projects come and go, and sometimes mines close. We are seeing complexity associated with sharp rises and falls of commodities related to the new economy, especially critical minerals. And let me say this. I think when we think about the long-run need for these minerals and metals, which is unquestionable, we shouldn't be thinking about the dollar price of a commodity now. We should be thinking about how that is likely to build over time and where it will be at the point at which a mine actually comes on, and where it will be at the point where the mine is halfway or 3/4 of the way through its life. But sometimes individual companies need to pull the pin on particular projects. But overall, I mean, that's a kind of interesting media story. But overall, the big story that is going on is huge new resources going into critical minerals capabilities in Australia, both in terms of mining, but also of downstream development. And I think that is going to be that's going to be a big story, and there'll be huge opportunities for India to take part in supply chain of critical minerals products out of Australia.
Thank you so much. That once again is great news, because I do want to bring this conversation back to the maritime domain rather than concentrate upon land-based mining. On the other hand, as High Commissioner has quite correctly pointed out, huge opportunities arise in supply chains, and many of those supply chains will in fact utilize the maritime domain. Now we had some young people
Sir.
at the back. We had one plaintive voice saying, here, sir. All right, please speak. Yes, the gentleman in the suit at the back. Yes, you know, Her Excellency has pointed out that you've been getting up like a jack in the box 4 times. So there you go.
Hello, sir. I'm Atul. I'm a student. So my first question is to His Excellency Delphin. Given the fact of piracy and state-sponsored maritime terrorism in the Indian Ocean region and the strategic interest of European Union in the Indian Ocean region, what are the potential avenues of cooperation and collaboration of EU with India, considering the fact of India being a victim of maritime terrorism, and what are the future prospects for the same? Second question to Mr. Chauhan, sir. Considering Admiral Mr. Chauhan, sir, I'm sorry. Considering the fact, considering India's maritime security architecture, how is India exerting its naval diplomacy or maritime diplomacy in the South Asian region, which is of great strategic interest in terms of resources, marine, like rare earth minerals and so on? And also given the fact that China has been exerting its exploitative and expansionist penetration in the region. So how is India playing as an emerging superpower in the region? And what are the prospects for the same? Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Atul. We'll take another question so that,
Sir, from the upper level, sir, there's a question. Sir.
Yes, from the upper levels, like God.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
My name is Hirok Jyoti Kalita. I'm pursuing Masters in International Relations at South Asian University. So my question is to the panelists is, as we all know, we have already talked about China's gray zone tactics in the first session. So I would like to highlight on that. So China is using the gray zone tactics and mainly leveraging the non-military means to achieve its strategic objectives without triggering a direct military confrontation or a military conflict. So my question is mainly on the aspect of cyber and information warfare of China against the other states. So basically how the ASEAN and the other Indo-Pacific countries are about or are strategizing its policies to counter China's cyber and information tactics and warfare. And also to the Ambassador, Madam, the Strait of Malacca is a very important and economic lifeline for Indonesia. So how Indonesia is coming up with more strategic policies and collabing and cooperating with other Indo-Pacific countries to lower the threat, the grave concern, the threat of China, its assertive actions in Indo-Pacific and South China Sea. Thank you.
Thank you. We will. I just wanted you to remember that this topic is about marine resource geopolitics. And while I understand and join you in your keenness to get as many answers from this assemblage of top-end diplomats, maybe the cyber security issues can be addressed in a different session of this very conference. But perhaps, Madam, you wouldn't mind taking a stab at the Strait of Malacca. And before that, we could ask His Excellency, Monsieur Delphin, to answer Atul's question. I'm going to duck that question altogether. So.
Thanks for the question, because it points to the cooperation in maritime security between the EU and India. And I think tomorrow you're going to have the Rear Admiral Paris, who is the operation commander for ASPIDES, one of the 2 naval operations that the EU has with the member states in the Red Sea, and we have the other one, Atalanta, with an area of intervention which as broad as the Northwest Indian Ocean. This dialogue has been nurtured, I would say, in a high speed way in the past years. It's not just about talking, it's about also exchanging. We just had the visit of an Indian delegation of Navy staff and officials from India to the operational HQ of Atalanta in Spain. We are indeed, you refer to the IFC IOR. I think the EU liaison officer is one of the waiting. I think there's an issue of space so I hope you're going to be able to expand the building. But it's not just, the conversation is about, developing a common understanding, a common analysis, improving situational awareness as to all kinds of above threshold, below threshold kind of threats you face in the region. It's oversea, it's at sea, it's undersea. It's all what comes with the difference. All this is now brought into the conversation between the EU and India. And I think this is important because just to make a seg to the question about this, the sub-threshold, yes, we do face that. This is the new normal, I would say, of warfare. And I think we need to be prepared for that. I mean, as much as for India as for EU and its member states, the freedom of passage, the safety and security in the Indian Ocean is absolutely vital. And guess what? Why is that India, the Europeans, and the Middle East decided to embark on the IMEC? It's just because it's so strategic. So I think investing way more into the maritime security in the Indian Ocean, I think it's a common good that both EU and India recognize that we need to nurture. So I think you will probably see more port calls of European vessels in India, more operations at sea, more cooperation in all different domains that concern maritime domain. And I think because that's, at land, on land, you somehow have the things pretty much mapped. The difference with the maritime space is things are very fluid by nature. So you cannot leave it unattended because we see indeed some scientific vessels crossing the area, mapping the seabed, for what purpose, what's going on. So sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for other reasons. So I need to be clear-eyed about what is happening in this space. And I think that is certainly something where I would see probably one of the main potential of growth in EU, India and EU member states, India cooperation when it comes to security and defense.
Thank you, Excellency. Madam Ambassador.
On Malacca Strait, you need to understand that Malacca Strait is one of the busiest sea lane in Southeast Asia. So there are 3 countries who manage the safety and as well as the trade lines, which is Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. So we are not alone. When we want to decide on anything on Malacca Strait, we need to have the trilateral discussion. And with that, I just want to let you know that we have conducted so many joint patrols with the 2 countries for any kind of illegal conducts, in particular illegal fishing. So because it is shared water, so we need to be mindful of that the strait itself, it's not like Indonesia own it. It is part of our EEZ, but still the management of the strait needs to be done and be decided, be discussed, 3 of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will just have a very quick response to Atul over there. And that is that with regard to India's own defense diplomacy in the immediate proximity of India, you remember very recently all the surge of maritime crime that took place consequent upon the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. Now, the reason why piracy was held in check was not because we were able to address the problem, the root causes of piracy, because the root causes of piracy lie on the land. And how that particular land is governed is an extremely complex issue which lies in the realm of these distinguished diplomats, but not necessarily in the realm of navies. However, navies were addressing and continue to address the symptoms. So they make sure that they have a cap on the events that might otherwise occur by simply presence. And the Indian Navy has been deployed in the Gulf of Aden and its environs on a continuous 24/7, 365 days a year basis since 2008. So we're now into 16 years of continuous deployment in that area. But when the Red Sea crisis broke and many navies began to pay attention to a far greater extent in that area, their eye got lifted away from the problems that were occurring in the rest of the Arabian Sea. And there, the Indian Navy stepped up in a manner that you should be extremely proud of. I am, in any case, where we deployed as many as 5 of our frontline most potent combatants, which engaged in a series of actions that were designed to counter the resurgence of maritime crime, and in so doing, rescued distressed mariners, not just from the ships that were flying or vessels that were flying the Indian flag, but from vessels that were flying flags which you would have otherwise thought were adversaries of India, including Pakistan. Now, the effect of that is not small. The effect is enormous. And so immediately, the Indian Navy was instrumental in this regard in terms of managing to restore the good order that must prevail if a rules-based order is to survive. Likewise, Indian diplomacy in the environs of India is a continuous process. It is not that our diplomacy will be derailed because one country chooses a particular administration to represent them. That is the prerogative of that country. Every country is sovereign, and we respect the sovereignty of every country. But irrespective of the regime that comes into power, no sensible country has a foreign policy that is geared for the 4 years of a given administration or 5 years of a given administration. Foreign policies extend to much larger time frames. Navies are an instrument of that foreign policy, and therefore navies operate on much larger time frames and over much larger spaces. Of course, I could go on and give you many examples, but the main point of this particular panel is that you have got this great opportunity. You will seldom receive such an opportunity of being able to have 4 captive, or roughly captive, top-end diplomats assembled before you, all ready to answer your questions. So I'm going to give you one more shot at asking the assembled distinguished diplomats here, but leaving me out of it. Yes, sir. The gentleman in, there are 2 gentlemen. So the one farther behind you, no, the next one, next row. There you go. I'm so sorry, I don't know all your names. I did bid you welcome, but you're an awful lot of people.
Thank you for this very wonderful session. I am Apurv Anand. I'm currently studying economics at Delhi University. My question to Ambassador of EU to India is that, sir, we have been seeing increasing influence of far-right parties in the EU, and they have inward-looking policy. They do not want to engage too much and intervene too much in Indo-Pacific as well. So do you see in near future, not right now, but in near future, that this will change their strategies and they will increasingly refrain from participation in Indo-Pacific region, and that might hinder our interest, because at this time we actually need US, Europe to actively participate in the region and help us out. Thank you, sir.
Before, sir, you take a stab at that, we have the Naval War College present in strength. Are they here? Yes, you are. All right, so maybe we should get one question from the Naval War College to be juxtaposed with the wonderful question that was just asked by the student of Delhi University, Apurv.
Good afternoon. I am Sanjay Kumar Dinkar, course participant of Naval War College, and my course is Naval Higher Command course. Goa. Sir, my question is, in Indo-Pacific region, there are many multilateral organizations. One of the organization has been formed under the leadership of USA, is Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. It seems this has been formed in response to China's regional comprehensive economic partnership, and all of the members of this group are part of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. But if the guideline we see or the aim of this grouping we see, we don't find actually any achievement. May I know the real aim and the relevance of this regional grouping? Thank you, sir.
May I know whom you are addressing your question to? We need to throw you under the bus at some point. All right. High Commissioner Green will accept that.
I address to Mr. Green.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. You know, he knows who's going to take that. But first, yes.
No, thanks for the question. Indeed, this is a bit of a recurrent fear that the EU is so self-centered that it does forget about the rest of the world. I don't see this as a distinct risk. I mean, first, it would be very short-sighted and self-defeating. I think here, strategic interest, I would say, trump the politics of the day. Very simple. If you look at what happened in the last 2 years, the EU has been confronted with the most existential threat on its border. And while we've been very active in supporting Ukraine, have we forgotten about the Indo-Pacific? No. And even we redoubled on the Indo-Pacific, because that's the nature of the reality of today's world, that the strategic theater of Europe is increasingly connected to the strategic theater of in Indo-Pacific. And just, people tend to forget the chronology. Just before the war of aggression, a week before, there was a summit that took place where two presidents declared limitless friendship. I don't remember exactly the expression. I think that was a strong strategic statement. Unfortunately, it was followed by the invasion of Ukraine. So I think if we are not understanding the reality of these strategic moves, I think we would fool ourselves in Europe. And I'm comforted by the fact that all the people that have their hands on the strategic bar and the rudder in Europe are really focused on the Indo-Pacific and not simply focused on the European strategic theater. And I think that can trump politics, definitely.
Brilliantly answered. Thank you so much, Ambassador. High Commissioner.
Thank you very much for the question about IPEF. And I really do mean that this is an important development. So we, as I said before, we think the challenges facing our region are more serious than anything we've faced since the Second World War. And for a country like ours, as I said before, that means we need to exercise our agency and our influence as much as we can. But the point that you raise is that that's not just in the security domain. And yes, we are bulking up in terms of our military capability. But at the same time, Australia is looking to do more economically in our region, in particular in Southeast Asia, to be a bigger player in infrastructure and investment there. In development assistance, so you may know that our assistance to the Southwest Pacific is at a never before seen level. We now give more than 4 times any other donor's support to the Southwest Pacific. We're doing a lot more in terms of infrastructure. But coming to your question, it's very much our view that we need to strengthen the rules and norms around trade and to support the facilitation of trade. you know, we're all bound up in what we describe as the free and open Indo-Pacific. Part of the free bit is free trade and allowing goods and services and people to move across borders at a faster rate. Now, we had a plan with the United States to conclude a TPP, and that failed to come about because of the way in which, I think it's not unfair to say, the politics of the United States has worked. And, you know, and how good was it at that moment when the US moved away from the TPP that the other members came forward and said, we're going to conclude this thing, even without the biggest economic power in it. And so came the CPTPP. There was a lot of people who bet against that. Subsequently, the United States under the Biden administration has come forward with a new mechanism to engage economically in the region, and that's IPEF. And we warmly welcome that. And that we think that is making really important inroads. But let me say this, and here, you know, skating slightly on thin ice, but let's be clear about it. The Australian government would encourage the United States to be even more involved in trade policy discussions of a multilateral character in the Indo-Pacific. That's an important ingredient for the sort of free and open and prosperous region that we want to create. So IPEF is good, but I think the center of your question is, couldn't we do better? And we think the answer is yes.
Thank you very much. So this is absolutely the last question. And if it's not going to Mr. Syed, we're not going to entertain it.
So,
yes. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes.
So I'm Commodore Rupanand Ghosh. I'm a senior research fellow in CCCS, Center for Contemporary China Studies. My question pertains to resource and critical raw materials. The UN Sustainable Development Goals of 2030 lays down very stringent targets. One particularly with the climate change deals with climate reduction, temperature reduction by 1.5 degrees. Now, for climate change and climate temperature control to happen, we need to look for renewable energy resources. We have spoken about the whole day in the first session. The critical minerals include cobalt, copper, lithium, nickel, and so on and so forth. Now, we are all aware which country dominates in the production and the resources of these kind of materials. At the same time, we have the International Seabed Authority, which, while it has given away blocks for seabed exploration, it is yet to come out with the legislation because the environmental impact assessment has not happened. On the other hand, we also have the BBNJ, the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, which has been signed and will come into force very soon. This also does not allow for seabed exploration. So the question that I'm asking is, these two appear to be incongruous. They're contradictory to each other. On the one hand, we need to bring down the temperature of the earth, for which we need to go for solar panel, electric vehicles, for which we need such resources which are fast depleting in the land resources, it's depleting. And we need to tap into the, beyond the high seas, the polymetallic nodules and polymetallic sulfides. Whereas we have another treaty, high seas treaty, which has come into play, which is again not allowing this to happen. So this is a incongruous, and how do we resolve this?
Thank you. Mr. Syed.
Thank you. Well, I decline to respond on the IPEF because we are not, France is not part of it.
No, just on the one.
I will be happy to answer this question. Well, what you just mentioned will be discussed next year in France. In June, in the city of Nice, France will organize the United Nations Ocean Conference, UNOC 3, the third conference on oceans. We are already preparing it It will be co-chair with Costa Rica. We are working on it with our Indian partners. We have organized a series of talks, blue talks, and the objectives are to reinforce international commitment for the protection of the oceans and the resources of the oceans. The second objective will be to increase, to mobilize more financing and to create new financial mechanism to tackle these difficulties and to work together on that. And also the third objective will be to strengthen scientific knowledge of the ocean to support policy and decision making. Also on this, on all the aspects you have mentioned. So we are already preparing this important conference in France next year. So we look forward to it. We have technical exchanges also already in place between France and India on these topics. The French Institute for the Studies of the Sea, IFREMER, has a partnership with NIOT Chennai, and absolutely with NMF, and we under the authority also with the Indian Ministry of Earth Sciences. We have regular talks. We have an ambassador at large for the oceans. He visited India in April. He's coming back in December to hold another dialogue on the blue economy and the governance of the ocean. If I have time, I would like also to come back to the question asked at the beginning by the student regarding the Chinese activities and activism near the French overseas territories. Well, we are aware, we are attentive and watchful about it. We have a direct dialogue with the Chinese authority to pass messages and to express our concerns. When there is a matter of concern, we talk to them. We share also information with the neighboring states, be it Australia or Indonesia. We have this coordination on this Chinese presence and activities in the region. And to observe it even more closely, we are reinforcing our presence in the Pacific. So I'm happy to tell you that this year, France opened a new embassy in the Samoa Island. It's not far from the French Polynesia, because we also want to be on the spot to observe and to watch what is happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. You will agree that we've had a scintillating conversation. The Chaupal has been well named. The Charcha has been exciting in every respect, honest, truthful, hard-hitting, sometimes to you and sometimes to me. But that's the nature of how things should be. If we, for example, take the case, there was much mention of Sri Lanka, and I just wanted to mention here that Sri Lanka is not a strategic partner of India. The reason is because Sri Lanka is a family member of India. We don't deal with Sri Lanka as some étranger. So Sri Lanka and India are symbiotically bound. Likewise is the case with Bangladesh. Likewise with Maldives. We just want to expand our family to the extent that is possible. And that's how I began this morning's welcome remarks to you, saying that when you come here and we interact with each other, we don't look like we've come here to have intellectually sharp debates that will establish one or the other of us as being cleverer or superior to the other. But to the fact that we've come together as a family, and sometimes in families you squabble and sometimes you want to kill the guy, but by morning everything is forgiven and you're in love again. And that is the nature of these conversations. So I cannot bring myself to have the hubris to try and summarize anything that has been said, because these are intellects far greater than my own. And so what I would like you to do, however, is in whatever fashion you deem is appropriate, please express our very great gratitude to our ambassadors and high commissioners present here today. Thank you. They have been very gracious. Not all of them have been asked, but they've been very gracious to agree for 2 minutes of our own NMF people to do a quick feedback interview as they leave the premises. So would you be okay with that, Excellency? Thank you. See, I told you they were gracious. And now I'm going to hand over back to Priyasha and say thank you to them on my own behalf as well. So thank you, Excellencies. Thank you, Excellencies.
Thank you, sir. May I now request Vice Admiral Krishnaswaminathan, AVSM, VSM, the Vice Chief of the Naval Staff, to present tokens of our appreciation to our very distinguished discussants. And in the same breath, may I respectfully ask all the dignitaries to come up and stand in front of the tables for a quick group photograph thereafter. And with this, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at our first haven of rest, where we will recharge our batteries before resuming our intellectual voyage tomorrow for the second day of the 2024 edition of the Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue. To better discuss the perspectives you have just heard, may I urge you to join us for a hot cup of tea or coffee right outside. Please be advised that we will commence the proceedings of Day 2 early at 5 minutes past 9 o'clock tomorrow, with registration slot being open from 8030 to 0905.